anxious as Gerard.
See you on the beach, Gary.
5, 4, 3, 2. And welcome everybody to Beyond the Booth Live. Gary, Keith, and Ron with you on the latest edition on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. It's good to see you all. I want to take, before we start, I want to take everybody behind the scenes because, Ronnie and I are both up in the Northeast and we got buried under 1.5 feet of snow the other day. Keith, on the other hand, is down in Florida. So right before we came on the air, Keith, not Ronnie, not me, Keith was wearing a fleece yes, in Florida. Could you explain that to those of us who've, been inundated with snow the last couple of days?
It was in the 40s this morning when I woke up at 7 o'clock, wind howling from the north, like the frozen tundra of Green Bay. It was freezing. So I broke out my hand warmers. This is a present. I got a bunch of them for you guys. So I'm going to mail them up to you. So these are, I know, Gary, you got delicate hands.
I do get cold so easily.
With your penmanship, and you wear those gloves and it affects how you score. You get a little sloppy. This, you just keep in your hand and you'll be fine.
Gary, I'm just talking about Vladimir Horowitz or something.
I mean, really. I'm just wondering, now that it appears more and more likely that the season is going to start on time, that means, last year we didn't do any games until the warm weather. So, if we're doing games from Citi Field like we did last year, home and road, we're going to have some really cold nights up there, Keith. And I'm worried about your blood getting thinned out, thinking that, a 40-degree day is cold. Well, we might have some 30-degree nights with the wind blowing in our booth.
You forget my full-length coat, my Thomas Jefferson coat.
I don't forget it. It's on my mind constantly.
I feel like this is almost a Mark Twainism, but the coldest game you guys ever did was maybe spring training in Vero Beach, that one game.
Oh, that's right. Well, that was that the commercial-free game that we did? The second game in the history of SNY?
Oh, and Ron, but the doubleheader in Denver that one year that Gary and I
was the worst.
And you were out. That was cold.
That was the day that Sandy Alderson was out on the field shoveling snow.
Yes.
To try and get the game in.
The left-hander pitched the second game for them. It was their ace the year before, and he had a bad year, and he couldn't find the plate.
Jeff Francis?
Yes, and he couldn't find the plate. I was going bonkers.
Well, he couldn't feel his fingers. Do you remember we went to Minnesota right after that, and John Neese pitched on Friday night, and he pitched fantastic.
Yes.
And it was like 30 degrees there.
That before or after the nose?
Oh, I think that was before Carlos Beltran paid for his septoplasty.
Okay.
Having had a septoplasty myself, I can say that it's a life-changing experience.
Really?
Yes.
I'll remember that.
I can breathe now.
Good.
Okay, so let's talk about some baseball. The news came down this week about a couple of prominent players retiring, one a Met and one not. And it got me to thinking. The two guys, Daniel Murphy and Dustin Pedroia, both announced their retirements this week. And in both cases, probably premature because of physical issues. But it got me to thinking about how baseball is unique in certain ways. One, the fact that in mid-career, a player can change the nature of the player that he is by making certain adjustments and become a different player. I don't think that happens in other sports. I mean, you can work on your jump shot, you can go in the weight room, but you can't really change the nature of who you are as a player in other sports. But in baseball, you can, and we've seen it in recent years with guys like Justin Turner and JD Martinez, and with pitchers like Charlie Morton, change the nature of who they are in mid-career. And there's no better example of that than Daniel Murphy, who went from being a really good player to being a superstar practically overnight by changing his swing. And the other thing I was thinking about with Dustin Pedroia, two things really. One is that, and this has been said plenty of times, that baseball is a sport where a player of any size can succeed. And Dustin Pedroia is a little guy who turned out to be an MVP. And the other thing is, and it's not quantifiable, but even in an individualistic sport like baseball, how a guy through the force of his will and his passion can make the other guys around him better. And I think Pedroia was that as well.
Absolutely.
Ronnie, I think you can address Pedroia better than myself.
Do Murph first.
Okay. Well, with Murph, I tell you what, Murph came up as an opposite field hitter, if you recall. And then he learned to pull with the experience. And I really think when Kevin Long came over as the hitting coach, and he came from the Yankees, where they taught that drop your back shoulder and look for the ball middle in with the short right field porch, is what they teach those guys, left-hand hitters, over in Yankee Stadium. I think it resonated with Daniel Murphy. Now, it takes a certain amount of intelligence, number one. Now, Daniel, people will think that, in the field, Daniel was all over the place, but Daniel knew hitting. He was a student of hitting, and he was a very intelligent hitter. So it takes an intelligent athlete to make an abrupt change like that, a polar change, and put it and make it work in a fairly quick. It just happened in the year that K Long was there, his first year as hitting coach, and I didn't think that Daniel kind of caught fire, and it took a while for him to get it, because you just can't, you can't change overnight. But to me, it showed an intellect that he was able to make that change. And of course, the results were just absolutely off the charts. It rates right there what he did, in the postseason, and then down the stretch. It rates right there with Cespedes, what Cespedes did when he first came over that first year and carried the Mets in 2015 to the division title. So I take my hat off to Daniel in that regard. And I remember what I said when he came up, and this will be the last thing I'll say, I'll let Roddy take the floor, is I thought he had a chance to be a batting title, to win a batting title, line drive hitter, used the whole field. And then he got kind of away from that. And, pitchers kind of find out your weaknesses. But I always felt that he had that. And it was just remarkable what he did, that transformation.
I always thought, Keith, it was pretty amazing what he did also after two devastating knee injuries early in his career. Could have sidetracked him. He could have had no career at all. And he had a marvelous one. So kudos to Murph. He's a big part of Mets history forever. As far as Pedroia, one of my favorite players, little Petey. And you're right, Gary, there's certain guys, it doesn't matter what their size is. He was always the biggest, toughest guy in the room, the guy with the real nail in your back kind of humor. He just was such an interesting player to watch. He wasn't fast, but he was a great base runner. He wasn't quick, but he was a great defensive player. I remember one play in particular always reminds me of Pedroia. So there was a throw from the catcher to the first base on a bunt. It went wide of the first baseman, and Pedroia was there to back it up. They got the runner kind of half turning to second base, threw behind him, and made the out. And after the game, people were, marveling at Dustin Pedroia. Wow, what a play, a hustle play to be behind first base. And he goes, "What do you mean a hustle play?" He goes, "I've done that every single year, every single game of my career. This is my 6th year in the league. Just think about how many times I've done it. And that's the first time that I ever made that play." So it just tells you he was always prepared for the thing that could happen. And that's, dotting your I's and crossing your T's. That's the kind of player he was. And Gary, you're right. He was so inspirational. People always talk about Big Papi, and over the breadth of Big Papi's career, he probably was the biggest player in that room. But when Pedroia was at his best, when he was the Rookie of the Year and MVP, he ruled that clubhouse.
Did you see?
Can I say one thing, Gary?
Go ahead, Keith. Sure.
The greatest player that I ever played against in my major league career, my 17 years, was 5'8", and it was Joe Morgan.
There you go.
Yeah. Did you see the David Wright quote about Pedroia? You know, they got to be friends when they played together in the World Baseball Classic, and the Mets were playing the Red Sox, and Pedroia was in the dugout, and David went over near the Red Sox dugout to try and field a pop-up. And, you know, David, he likes to mix it up, trash talk with guys. So he says to Petey, hey, why don't you stand up while I'm here? Oh, that's right, you are standing, or something like that.
Yeah.
And Pedroia said, yeah, well, all I have to do is stand on my MVP trophy and my 2 world championships, and I'm a little taller. And David said he had no comeback. So Pedroia, he didn't take anything from anybody. He was fun. I want to piggyback off what you said about Murph, Keith, because the same discussion has been had recently about Jeff McNeil, right? When Jeff first came up, it was all about the contact. He had hit a few home runs in the minor leagues. And then in 2019, he broke out second half and hit a lot of home runs. And then last year kind of maybe got caught in between a little bit and did not hit the way he was accustomed to, either for average or power, that first month of the season. But the second month, he really kicked it in gear and became that contact hitter again. So I guess having watched Murph's transformation, where do you think McNeil is going from here?
Well, I think that you can say, and I believe this, and it happened with Pete Alonso. Well, I think there was a little bit of a sophomore jinx where you come up, Jeff, and he just was incredible. And what he did in the second half, all of a sudden hitting the home runs, I was always fearful of that. Getting off to a bad start, I think it was part of, things are expected of you. They weren't expected of him. He kind of was languishing in the minor leagues for a long time and finally got his opportunity. And boy, did he make the most of it. But then to come back the next year and it's expected, and then things don't go right. Remember, we did an interview with him, and I did all over the phone. We couldn't do any face-to-face. And remember, he was always running too much to first base. He has that Ichiro type run to first base when he was swinging. He was running too quick. And what the interesting thing was, he called an old teammate that told him, hey, you got to stay in the box a little longer. You're running away. So you can get kind of caught up and you lose the fundamentals, even though they have all the tape. And maybe he was going too quick because of the home run production in the second half. It's funny how the mind works. And he realized that, and he was able, which shows intellect, which I think all the greats would separate the very good player, the average player, with the great players, is there's a intellect there that they can sort out what's going on and make the adjustments where a lot of guys can't. And I think that Jeff has that quality. And I think he got back to hitting. And I think now he said, I just think he was so upset with himself. Listen, we kind of chuckled up there. He doesn't take outs very easily. He throws the helmet, and he's like, he should get a hit every time up at the plate. And I think that this game will knock you down. You think you got it figured out, this game will find a way to knock you back down and to get you back down in the basics. And he went, I think he just totally said, to heck with the power. He prides himself, like I did, on being a 300 hitter. I think that's my feeling. That's the most important for him. And he went back to his basics and started hitting line drives. Didn't hit for the power last year, but he sure hit.
Gary, Keith makes a good point. I'll just really quickly, I think that let's not put any definitions on Jeff McNeil. Just let him be himself. Hitter first, average hitter first, hit for average. The power will come when the power comes. He has great instincts as a hitter, and he can beat you in a lot of different ways. I remember the at-bat he took, was it maybe the bottom of the ninth inning off of Roldis Chapman in Yankee Stadium, a real tough at-bat, and worked a walk, and then Rosario hit a 2-run walk-off home run in Yankee Stadium. That's a way to beat you too. And I think he can do all those things.
Well, it's going to be fun to watch this year over a full season and see how he approaches things, because he has such an ability to put the barrel of the bat on the ball that when he does turn on a ball, he's got power and he can hit home runs. You just don't want him to get too wrapped up in it, I guess. We were talking before about how it looks likely that there's going to be a full season based on the lack of interplay between the owners and the players when the owners tried to push the season back. And wrapped up in that as well is the fact that it looks like, at least for the moment, that there's not going to be a designated hitter in the National League. And this might impact the Mets more than it impacts any other team, not just in terms of whether you want to continue to pursue a defensive-oriented center fielder, but also trying to figure out what to do with your two slugging first basemen. The fact of the matter is that Pete Alonso, I think everybody, agrees can only play first base, that there's no way that you're going to move him to another position. Whereas Dom Smith has shown that he can go out and be a body out in left field and make some plays, but not going to be a Gold Glover. So is that what we're left with at this point? Because I think it's a given that even without a DH, that at least 140, 150 times a year, you want both those guys in your lineup every day.
Well,
go ahead and take it, Ron.
Yeah, I say yes. That's what you're left with. Without the DH, Dom is going to be playing left field, Alonso first base, and I think that's a shame. At the end of last season, Dominic had such an amazing year on the field, off the field, everything. He started the discussion on, if you think about it, and you had to project 5, 6, 7 years from now, who's going to be the better player? Is it going to be Alonso? Is it going to be Dominic Smith? A year and a half ago, you would have easily picked Alonso. I don't think you'd do that now. So they both have to be in the lineup. I think the only adjustment you can make for Dom is, he's going to work hard. He's going to do his best in left field. But please just push him back as deep as you can push him so that he's coming in. And you tell Lindor, who's your all-star shortstop, who just loves to catch pop-ups, you've got everything that is in short left field. And maybe that will cover up enough.
Well, it's obvious that Dom is the better hitter. Pete obviously is your quintessential slugger, your Harmon Killebrew type player, and Harmon Killebrew was not a good fielder. Without a center fielder and Dom in left field, I'm a little fearful. Dom doesn't cover a lot of ground. He's not a real fast runner. When he gets going, he's fine running the bases, but he's not a speed burner by any stretch of the imagination. And he is a Stratomatic 4 out there, okay, in left field. He's not going to cover a lot of ground. He's going to give it his best shot. But I agree with Ronnie, he's got to play deep. My feeling is this is, I'm sure they've mulled it over upstairs, could they trade one of them at high value? If there's no DH. I'm not saying to trade them. That's a big decision. You've got a guy that hit 50 home runs, and that doesn't happen very often, even in today's game. Even he had a sophomore bad year. Who's to say that he was not going to go on and do what he did in his rookie season? You've got Dom, who's always has now come to the forefront, and I think hit like he can. He's a great breaking ball hitter, by the way. And he's had weight issues. We talk about longevity, how long careers are going to go. Dom's got to be in that category too. He's got to keep himself in shape. But it's interesting, what would they bring on the market if you traded one? I shouldn't say get rid, but traded one of them. It would be a real gutsy move if Sandy Alderson did that. So I'm just throwing that out there for debate.
Well, I think that you'd get a pretty good haul for either one. But the caveat that I would throw in is that even if there's not going to be a DH in the National League this coming season, and it looks like there won't be, I think the odds are that from 2022 forward that there will be. So it might, if you do keep them both, it might just be 1 year that you have to kind of shoehorn things in. But my question then is, and maybe Ronnie, you want to address the idea of a trade, but if there's not going to be a DH, do you stop pursuing Jackie Bradley? Does that come off the table? Or could you sign Bradley and think about trading Nimmo? Maybe that's the way you go. You add defense by bringing in Bradley, who's much better center fielder than Nimmo. And you get the value that Brandon would bring back, which would be considerable as well. The high on base percentage guy who has value in that way. I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, I honestly don't know what they're going to do either. My first thought was, can Alonso play at third base? So I guess we're all in agreement that he can. Maybe there's a defensive center fielder like a Harrison Bader or something where you can make a trade with Nimmo and get a guy like Bader. I don't know what the trade would be, but both of those guys are going to be in the lineup. And right now, and I would say, to answer your question, Gary, I would say that you can't get Bradley. I mean, I wouldn't spend that money on Bradley because all that's going to do is preclude someone else from playing. It's going to take Dom or someone out of the lineup.
Or Nimmo. I mean, that's right. There are always so many positions available.
If looks like there's no DH, more emphasis on having a bench. You can keep all three if you go out and get a center fielder. It doesn't necessarily have to be Bradley. Say now, because in defense is so important and you're going to have Dom out in left field, it certainly brings center field to the fore. And if you get a defensive center fielder, you can move them around. You're not going to get hurt. A tough right-hander, you can put Dom in at first base. You can throw Nimmo out in left, and then you've got Pete on the bench. You got movable parts there. So there's a lot of options here. So it's great to mull this over and talk about this, because it means that you've got talent on the team that it's a positive going forward.
I never in a million years thought that in any year we would be having a conversation where I would be saying, the Mets National League really needs a DH. I mean, I've always been such a diehard against the idea of a designated hitter, and we lived with it for the short season last year. And I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but given the Mets personnel, there's really no other way to look at it right now.
It's like having the pool in your backyard. You can't go backwards, man. You know what I mean? I gotta have that pool.
A lot of backfill to take it out of play. One guy we haven't talked much about is James McCann. The Mets lived with a subpar defensive catcher the last 2 years. And, in 2019, when Wilson Ramos was hitting, the trade-off kind of seemed worthwhile. And then last year, when he didn't have nearly as good an offensive year, it really hurt. And I wonder, Ronnie, from a pitcher's standpoint, what the difference is going to be this year, pitching primarily to McCann as opposed to Ramos.
James McCann is another big athlete like Wilson, a little taller than Wilson Ramos, but much quicker feet, blocking balls. All of his metrics defensively, blocking balls, framing pitches are all way above where Wilson was. So he's going to bring youth. He's going to bring exuberance and a real knowledge on how to call a game. Although he hasn't been. I think what we're going to see is that he's a guy that was going to be the next great catcher. It didn't work out. He became kind of a part-time catcher. But in the role and when he played, the last couple of seasons he has been excellent. I don't think he's in the same breath as JT Realmuto. I mean, that's not the kind of complete player you're going to get. But I think for the Mets defensively, with the kind of pitching they have, it's going to be so important. And I think with the slider of Carrasco, the sinker and changeup of Stroman, of course, the great stuff. You're going to need a nimble guy back there to weather the storm and to be a friend to these pitchers. So I think it was a great signing. I think, especially with the money differential between maybe Realmuto and what they signed McCann for. And moving forward, it's going to be a young, athletic catcher. And I think that's what the Mets haven't had in a while. I know that Sandy Alderson was a big fan of Travis d'Arnaud, and the Mets might look back on that as a bad day when they let him go. But I think McCann is, in what I've seen of him, certainly a notch or two above d'Arnaud's skills.
And then there's McCann's bat, which, in that part-time role has improved during his last couple of seasons. And again, there's no way to know how he's going to handle the larger role, Keith, but I imagine there's not going to be a lot of pressure on him in that lineup.
I would assume he's going to hit down in the lineup, maybe seventh. He hit 9 home runs last year, I believe, and on a shortened season. That's bringing some pop in the lineup. That's 20 plus home runs on a full season. You don't know, if he's going to, everybody slumps and there's ebbs and flows of the season. And it was a 60-game sprint last year. But the fact that he did hit he had 18 home runs the one year, was it where he found his power. So the fact that this lineup is solid, and it also is begging for right-handed bats as well with the overload of left-handers. He's a welcome right-handed hitter in that lineup.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so we're going to want to take some questions from our viewers. Linus on YouTube would like to know who you think the Mets' most consistent starter, not named deGrom, will be in 2021.
Oh, Ronnie, you go.
I know Mets fans, you haven't got the opportunity to watch him throw a lot, but Carlos Carrasco is upper echelon pitcher. If you can kind of think of in his prime, Freddie Garcia. Remember Freddie Garcia when he pitched for the Mariners and Chicago White Sox? A guy that gives you just great effort, lots of innings, makes all of his starts, and just has wicked stuff. We're going to really enjoy watching him pitch. I think he's going to be the most consistent because over his career, when you base it with the other guys, he's been the most consistent. Now, I'm leaving Syndergaard out of this because he's not back until the middle of the year. But I think Carrasco, to me, Linus with the bad blanket, is going to be the most.
Linus, say hello to Lucy for me. I agree with Ronnie. I think Carrasco will be, if he stays healthy, and he has been durable. He's 34 years old, but he pounds innings out there, and I think he's a quality pitcher. I'm going to agree with Ron on this one.
I'm going to throw in with Marcus Stroman. I think he's due to have a big year. I think the time that he got under his belt in New York, I think will serve him well. I think he's going to be refreshed after sitting out for last year. He's pitching for a contract. I think Marcus is going to have a huge year.
Nice.
Now, I understand that Room Raider has not been watching our Facebook Live exploits. However, Dan on Twitter wants to weigh in. He says Keith gets high marks on his background. He says, I look like I'm in a cave. And he says, Ronnie looks like he's helming the Starship Enterprise.
Oh, he stole my thunder. I was going to ask. Ronnie should be in a Kubrick movie. 2000 Space Odyssey or Clockwork Orange.
Hey, Don, I've been homeless in my car the last 2 days. This is definitely a step up. And I honestly had a better shot but our producer took me out of there because there might have been a bare bosom behind me. So that's why we have.
I'm sorry, what?
Excuse me?
Excuse me?
What was that you said?
You're going to have to explain that a little bit better.
I have a beautiful painting. I had a beautiful painting in the background, and some considered it too risque for our show.
It looks like you're getting ready for a lobotomy right there, right under the lights.
You know what they say, Ronnie? Discretion is the better part of valor.
That's right.
I'd rather you have the surgical lamps above you. Well, on that note, we're going to close down this week's edition of Beyond the Booth Live. We'll see you next Thursday at 4:00 on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. For Keith and for Ron, I'm Gary. We'll see you again soon.
Bye, guys. That was fun.
Ah, gee, what?